Hi, this is Damien Mariathope, and I am an axiological atheist. And today I'm going to give you a presentation on Proto Religion. Basically, as I see it, superstition begins somewhere around 1,000,000 years ago. And then this leads into Pre-Animism about 300,000 years ago. And then to finally, with human origins, the animism of religion about 100,000 years ago. And so first I'd like to address the little on the psychology behind religious belief. According to a psychologist is a professor at Ohio State who has studied human motivation for more than 20 years, suggests religion attracts followers because it satisfies all the 16 basic desires humans share. And that religious beliefs and practices are designed to meet one or more of these 16 desires. Moreover, while all people, in a sense, need to fulfill some of these basic desires, not everyone turns to religion to satisfy them. And secular society definitely offers great alternatives to fulfill these basic desires. Thus, religion competes with secular society to meet these 16 needs, and can gain or lose popularity based on how well people believe that it compares to a secular society, or what it has to offer. So, as I see it, people need to understand, to me, religion is a cultural product. It is no different in a sense than to say that language is not evolutionary, or that tool use and tool making is not evolutionary. Our desire to need, in a sense, or adapt to environment, it precludes the desire for tool making. Not that we, in a sense, are born with the desire to make tools. It's that it fits a need. The same thinking is with language. In a sense, although we have the vocal cords and the ability for language, there's more that motivates language, like the social bonding aspect. If we didn't have any desire to socially bond, language would not fit that same need. Likewise, religion itself is not something we're born with. It's a cultural product. Superstition, the motivation to put agency irrationally into our environment and how we perceive our environment, now that is, in a sense, evolutionary, and it attaches not directly to the need to us to be superstitious, but more on the lines that what we're doing is we are, in a sense, looking at the environment, and it's safer for us to assume agency in things and thus protect ourselves than to simply not, and then things like, especially a long time ago, being eaten by wild animals. If we see the bushes moving, it's better for us to assume something's there than for us to not. And so evolutionary doesn't make it this way, though. It's just that the ones that didn't move, that just allowed the trees, in a sense, to be trees and didn't realize that maybe a rustling could be a hidden animal, meant that those beings probably got eaten and thus removed from the DNA that then leads to what becomes modern humans. So superstition, again, begins around 1,000,000 years ago to me, and then pre-animism 300,000 years ago, leading to animistic religion about 100,000 years ago in Africa. So pseudo-superstition, or the things that in a sense come for that to me, or anything I would say that's more than 1,000,000 years. So primal superstition starts at 1,000,000 years. Proto-superstition culminates probably about 600,000 years ago. Progressed superstition about 300,000 years ago, or what I call pre-animism. And then primal religion, or animism, starts about 100,000 years ago. Proto religion, or early animism, is somewhere around 75,000 years ago. And then progressed religion, or totemism, is about 50,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago. We see it with shamanism. I would first like to point out that there seems to be some scant possible hintings of the earliest pseudo-superstition before 1,000,000 years, and possibly as far back as 2,000,000 years. Yet, unlike this, it is not a full type of superstition. In other words, the fact that we kind of see agency in things, even seen in children, up to 7, We seem to have this proclivity to have animistic, in a sense, explanations for things we don't understand. If we see the wind move, it's possible that something is moving the wind. And so it's this simple element that then becomes like a building, snowball down a hill. We then attach more things to it. Then we tell other people about it. When we tell other people about it, we then add, more flair and creativity, and then we add more agency because we're very good at actually telling stories and coming up with things. But this happens though pre-speech. We give inflections. Most of human speech, in fact, or human communication, I should say, is not limited to the words we use. It can be the tones. In other words, you could say, I love you, but you can say it 10 different ways, and not all of it feel like it's actual, legitimate, I love you, depending on the speed, depending on tone, depending on gesture. And so, to me, when we understand that it's a progression, a building upon each other, that's to me what ends up in this evolution of religion. And religion evolution, in a sense, moves from the loosest, growing superstitionism to a greater development of a thought addiction that was used to, in a sense, manage things like fear and desires to sway control, sometimes the control over a dangerous world. I hear people talk about, religion's control, and I hear seemingly that they limit this idea of control only to the possibility of others that we're controlling. Well, often we control fear in ourselves. I mean, it certainly precludes us to, if we actually think about the world sometimes, it can feel like, well, it's hopeless, because we're alone. We're this fragile body, we need people, From practically birth, we learn this, that if we don't, have a caretaker, we're going to suffer and possibly die. So life, in a sense, is inherent with this kind of a fear of well-being more than just fear of life. But both of those, in a sense, to me, are connected and motivate desires for trying to understand. We like to generalize also. We'd like to think of things that are easier for us to understand. A lot of people don't watch all my videos because they're complicated and they're hard. And I have long, drawn-out explanation with lots of detail. Yeah, but the problem is not simple. We like to simplify it. The simple problem is actually quite complex. And I try to give, the most adequate, expression of this complex problem. And so to me, I think of it in a series of stages. And like I said, we have religion, to me, really happening about 100,000 years ago, this primal religion of animism. And then it basically builds on itself and builds on itself as it goes. And so to me, the understanding should be not that religion's a cultural evolutionary adaptation, but superstitionism is. But superstitionism is the mother, in a sense, of supernaturalism. That in the sense that you have superstitions, and thus it precludes you to believe in things like supernatural. And that it's the supernatural inclinations that are flawed that then are built into this mythology that is religion. And so to me, superstitionism is, in a sense, the mother of religion. So, again, primal superstition starts about 1 million years ago. Proto-superstition about 600,000 years ago. Progressed superstitionism about 300,000 years ago, which when I think it becomes pre-Animism. And pre-Animism ideas can be seen in things like rock art, as expressed in a sense as portable anthropomorphic type of art, where it has, in a sense, human nature or features to it, which can be related to some sort of it, I believe, possibly an ancestor veneration. Or I think of it more like less magical, probably, and more like how we put gravestones. In a sense, we don't think the stone itself is some sort of a supernatural being, but it represents what we think that person was, or it was like a remembrance stone. I think it probably has something more to do with that. Because at a very early time in history, it appears that, these proto, in a sense, humans were starting to do these behaviors for the same reasons I think that we would do them today. We even seen some animals, that there's an effect that happens, or a reverence for the dead. There's a respect. This happens in primates, but other animals as well, including elephants, seem to care or have a feeling about dead, members of their group. And so to me, humans are not the only species who do things like bury the dead. The practice has been observed in chimpanzees, elephants, and even dogs. Intentional burial, particularly with grave goods, though, is a different concern for the dead that probably didn't start until Neanderthals, the first, in a sense, of our human species to practice burial with this intentionality of burying the dead. It was some sort of a grave goods attached or added to them, or some sort of a symbolic way of burying the dead that leads you to believe that there was something, greater going on than it had been, as a fact before. And there's certainly cave sites like in Iraq or in Corsica that show that Neanderthals were doing this behavior pre, any involvement with modern humans. At least this is true by 130,000 years ago in Corsica. The earliest, in a sense, undisputed human burials are closer to about 100,000 years ago. And these remains were done the same way, in a sense, as Neanderthals before them, using red ochre, in a sense, putting sprinkling it on the grave or on the person itself, which shows a sort of a ritual intentionality. But this makes me wonder too, since in a sense Neanderthals did it first, the question and almost are copied by later modern humans in a similar or area, such as it seems like Neanderthals and humans were occupying the Levant or Israel, and seem to copy, the humans seem to copy the same ritualistic behaviors, including tool technology, of the Neanderthals that were in that area. And so, did Neanderthals teach us a form of primal religion or pre-Animism? About 120,000 years ago, it's possible. Homo sapiens have known to have reached the Levant by about 120,000 to 90,000 years ago. And it certainly, at some extent, had left Africa by 100,000 years ago. There is evidence of intentional burial of 15 African individuals covered in red ochre, and they were from a group who seemed to have visited and then either went back to Africa or went extinct. Most likely, though, I would think that this behavior was transferred back to Africa at least, because by 100,000 to 74,000 years ago in Border Cave in South Africa, there's an intentional burial of an infant with red ochre and an accompanying shell ornament, which seems to be a kind of grave good. And this is a very interesting connection because this seems to match the buried Africans that were found in Israel. So to me, animism for humans, like I said, is approximately 100,000-year-old belief system that seems to be part of one that continues today. And to me, all religions, in a sense, today are just a branch off of this Africanized animism that is basically, in a sense, a spirit-filled life or afterlife. And so if you believe in these kind of things, in a sense, you're a hidden animist. And what I mean by spirit-filled life, I mean that you see agency or the possibility of spirits in things in life, and that these spirits can last after death. And it seems to me that it may be these Neanderthal ideas that were transmitted in a primal religion, this pre-Animism, Animism, or at least they transmitted possible thoughts of tool technology, culture, and thoughts of afterlife. Neanderthals seem to express what could be perceived as this primal type of religion. And this could go back as far for the Neanderthals as much as possibly 250,000 years ago. Certainly, Neanderthals were using red ochre in likely a ritualistic way by about 230,000 years ago. And so do you think it's crazy that I would say that Neanderthals might have transmitted this primal religious packet of ideas? Consider this. It does appear that about 175,000 years ago, Neanderthals built mysterious underground circles and caves with broken stalactites. Evidence suggests that Neanderthals were the first to intentionally bury the dead, doing so in shallow graves, though, with among stone tools and animal bones. So to me, it's interesting because as I studied the evolution of religion and religion ideas in the archaeological record, to me, I started to realize it seems that religion possibly began in some sort of wonder, like you didn't understand the reality and you looked around and tried to figure out answers. But the problem with religion is it didn't stay in this open wonder, this free thinking in a sense, or pre-thinking. It actually ended with closed-mindedness. So now they know the answers. They won't or be moved from the answers that they've already accepted without evidence. And how odd it is that, in a sense, the earliest echoes of religion, seemingly, they were at some point trying to honestly understand the world in a time before science. And yet, since the earliest echoes of science, the desire for honesty, to understand the world, came into conflict with religious beliefs. And this battle for what people believe or people want to understand and honesty started to begin. This new challenge of science challenges the old beliefs of religion. So, where does it start to me? We first have to understand how humans, in a sense, we change from the older primates to a newer type of thing. And it seems that about 3.4 million years ago, there's bones that show cut marks made by stone tool cuts from Ethiopia. Now, this is interesting because this is showing a progression in a sense that later you'll see tool technology starts off very basic and probably was just scavenging, things that had died or were attacked by other animals or died from sickness. And that people probably just scavenged and used, very rudimentary tools. Certainly, there's a tool technology that are found over there by at least up to 20 stones that are 3.3 million years old. So it wasn't a one-off that the one person did, or one event. It seems to be a multiple of events. And that's in Kenya. So we have basically 3.3 million year old stones in Kenya, East Africa. And then by 2.6 million years ago, we have another technology advancing in East Africa. And then by 1.76 million years ago to 130,000 years ago, we get a more distinctive oval pear-shaped hand axes that are associated with Homo erectus. And to me, it's really Homo erectus that the party starts for religion, or the leading to the elements of religion. And this new technology seems to be stone tools that are way more advanced, way more intricate than are necessary for simple use. And I believe it's this sort of a beginning that we're seeing this pseudo-superstition, because it's copied for a long time. This Chiluvian hand axes that they're making are distinctly similar. They're being transmitted by more than just someone watching one time or seeing it on the ground, then picking it up and copying it. This is something that it basically has to be taught. And so it's very interesting because Homo erectus probably had some rudimentary ability to speak. Whether they were able to actually form language, I doubt, but it's certainly possible that they were making grunts and noises with some kind of a symbolic meaning that would aid them in teaching. And so, to me, the understanding too is that these everything evolves, religion evolves, and so do the ideals of things like language and stone tools. So the stone tools start off really big, in a sense, and they basically move to be the middle Stone Age. They get smaller, and then the later Stone Age they get even smaller generally. And the characteristic is that we seem to have more ability to use stone tools in a new way. That they at first, in a sense, they're more fixed at their way that they're used, and then later, they're used in multiple ways, and often they're done in a very high stylized manner, showing that there's definitely a differentiation of their use. And so these stone tools at 1.76 million years ago to 130,000 years ago are typically found with the Homo erectus remains. And they're produced during the lower Paleolithic era across Africa and much of West Asia, South Asia, and Europe, and are typically found, in a sense, with the Homo erectus remains. It is thought that these technologies are more primitive developed from more primitive stone tool technologies of Homo habilis. So once again, it's a transferring of ideas from even stone tools, and same with religion. It's just a transfer of one idea that keeps being refined. So Homo erectus is basically upright man depicting that there's a new sense of walking. Although to me, I think there's more that happens than just with walking, and walking probably happened before Homo erectus. But certainly Homo erectus is probably using this ability to walk or run in a new way, probably aiding in its hunting strategies itself, along with the ability in mind to create things like stone tools. So 1.5 million years ago to 300,000 years ago seems to be, in a sense, a emerging sacredization or possible worship of fire. There's definitely controlled use of fire evident, but there doesn't seem to be evidence of cooking at this time. But it's still, they may have. And certainly there is some sites, such as one dated at anywhere from 780,000 to 1.2 million years ago, where the skeletons belong to the Homo erectus or Homo heidelbertus, or possibly another form of Homo. And the evidence seems to show that they're using stone tools to butcher animals in relation to the use of fire. But certainly by Homo erectus by 1 million years ago, it's certainly like a primal superstition. There's a controlled use of fire, and also the indication of using it for cooking. And this also at the same time seems to be an improved stone tool use and stone tool manufacturing. And it's likely that there was a form of proto-speech, in a sense, which would certainly help with the ability to work in teams or groups to acquire food, and also for other survival strategies. And certainly the primal superstition then helps people in a sense to see the reasons for staying in these groups. And this is not religion itself, but I believe that this sort of this group cohabitation, it's this social bonding element of religion. But I think that it becomes even more evident with the time of the Pre-Animism at 300,000. Although it's possible that portable rock art figure stones occur as much as 800,000 years ago. And so it certainly is more to think about. But for sure, by about 500,000 to 300,000, there's definitely a big amount of these figure stones, and certainly after 300,000 to about 100,000, there's even more. So although we like to think of ourselves as unique and special, it's probably Homo erectus that invented modern living. 750,000 years ago in Israel, there's evidence of social organization, communication, it seems, and divided living with workspaces, as well as they may have been built by Homo erectus or another ancestral human species. 500,000 years ago in Japan, there's it appears to be a Homo erectus, a semi-permanent living shelter. 400,000 years ago, there is evidence of 12 huts in France, built in a sense with stakes and braced by, in a sense, a ring of stones. Now, this could have been possibly Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergus, and or even maybe Neanderthal or some other Homo sapien ancestor that possibly could have been involved. 350,000 years ago, in Germany, it appears that there was Homo erectus or another Homo species that were living and constructed shelters similar to the ones even seen currently with Bushmen in South Africa. So we need to understand that we need to be looking back at what's really going on. So anthropomorphic pre-animism human faces art certainly is somewhere in the Netherlands at about 450 to 300,000 years ago. And then progressed superstition. About 430,000 years ago in Spain, there appears to be a pit of bones, seeming evidence of intentional storing of about 28 individuals in a cave chamber pit, possibly seen as a symbolic pseudo-womb or something. And it has been on top of it with a red quartzite tool that's unused is found on top of the bodies, possibly like a seeming funeral offering. So this could to me be a possible early type of cemetery. So portable rock art certainly begins by at least 300,000 years ago. And this portable rock art, to me, I believe, leads to this animistic somethingism. And I mean somethingism because you'll hear people even today talk about this. They'll say, I don't believe in a God, but I believe in something. Or I think that something had to start this, or something has to be involved. And it's basically this, in a sense, argument from ignorance with our superstition mind. And to me, this is definitely connects to this animistic supernaturalism where we go, aha, I know there's agency. I know that there's a God. I know this had to be started by magic. And that's the thing that's presented, I believe, in today's religion. And it's this basic representation of a general kind of animism that goes back to about at least 100,000 years ago. So when did we come in the picture? Well, there certainly seems to be arcane form of hominids in Morocco at about 350,000 years ago, possibly suggesting that they are part of the Homo sapien lineage. Became, in a sense, distinct as early as 350,000 years ago, adding as much as 150,000 years ago to our species' believed history, because before it was assumed that human line emerged somewhere around 200,000 years ago. Moreover, Homo sapien-like fossils in South Africa have been tentatively dated at 260,000 years ago. So, Pre-Animism, approximately 300,000-year-old belief system. And to me, the emergence of Pre-Animism, just like all other aspects in our evolution and our use of ideas, tools, whatever, in a sense, is no accident. Because at least by about 300,000 years ago, there was, in a sense, added to our evolution in our size of our brain and structure of our face. And so 300,000 years ago, there's Moroccan, North African skulls that look shockingly a lot like modern humans. And these skulls hold a combination of advanced as well as arcane features, suggesting that they may represent the very root of our modern human species. This is further supported in how all humans, or Homo sapiens, ever found, even as far beyond, in a sense, Africa, trace their ancestral lineage to these, in a sense, North African skulls. At least to a point to where there is, in a sense, a distinction between us and other hominids. So 300,000 years ago, it's the brain is close to what it is today. About 100,000 years ago, it's almost to where it is today. But by about 10,000 years ago, there seems to be, in a sense, not a largening of the size of the brain, but a more development of the internal structures or matrix in the brain itself. So about 250,000 years ago is Homo naledi, and seemingly an intentional cemetery and a mysterious cache of bones of several Homo naledi were recovered from a deep chamber in South African cave, seeming to express a cemetery far from the cave entrance, and assembled in a sense or accessible only through a narrow, difficult passage, impossible place to live, and not associated by, in a sense, any other purposeful part of the chamber, and not, in a sense, containing any animal bite marks or drag marks as if they had been carried in by animals. And there actually now has been found 2 chambers in this cave. Originally, there was over 1,500 Homo naledi, in a sense, specimens found in 2013, in a sense, deep underground behind narrow passageways. And a new chamber was also found with 100 Homo naledi species that have been found there, including 1 partial skeleton and several small mammals. And so this is the Rising Star Cave System in Africa. And it's thought that there have been some that have been skeptical that this could have been a burial, but with the addition of yet more remains in another cave area, in a sense, this vindication for it being a possible cemetery, it can't be really wholly contested. And the hypothesis seems to be, evident that there possibly was an intentional placing or disposal of the dead. And the further fossil remains have been found seems to help to add to this. And what's interesting too is that there's some of these are as much as 475 feet from, in a sense, the other chamber. So it wasn't like it was an accident. And interesting enough, there's one in an extremely physically difficult position, and in a sense, almost like a yoga position that the body is placed in, that would make someone believe that this was an intentional placement. So we got Morocco with 300,000-year-old bones, in a sense. And then we have Ethiopia with a 195,000-year-old bones. Israel with 194,000-year-old Homo sapien bones. Ethiopia with 160,000-year-old bones. With the remains, we need to understand that our relation to Neanderthal, DNA taken from Neanderthal bones in a German cave hinted at a much earlier encounters between the two species of us and them, dating back to more than 200,000 years ago. Neanderthal DNA sequences also from the Altai cave in Siberia, the Desovian cave, as well as from Spain and Corsica, show evidence that human Neanderthal inbreeding is as far back as 100,000 years ago. Approximately 1 to 4% of the genome of non-African modern humans, in a sense, carry a genetic lineage of Neanderthal. Although modern humans who lived about 40,000 years ago have been found to have had as much as 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals diverged from archaic humans probably about 500,000 years ago, with several likely occurrences of inbreeding after that. So in North Libya, at about 200,000 years ago, there's evidence of ostrich shell beads. And this is, I think, interesting because it likely was Neanderthals that were making these. And so what is the meaning of these early beads? Are they pendants? Well, for sure there's some kind of beads. And the production of it seemed to be pushing to its limits of this medium of what you could do with such a small little piece, and seems to express a sense for perfection. And that the beads contained, in a sense, no information on them, but the fact that they're even created shows a symbolic representation of some kind. And certainly pendants worn would be some sort of a level of self-awareness or other awareness, and expressed in a sense of more what we think of as cognitively modern. Beads can be used in a number of ways, for a number of purposes, in various forms of another, depending on the desires of the wearer, and possibly showing a status in a sense of a society or culture. One might believe that a bead is simply a artistic body ornament, but it almost certainly, that would be an oversimplification that is limited to, in a sense, what its original meaning likely meant. I have a feeling that the possibly beads being produced, so many of them, as well as some forms of rock art, certainly could relate to stars in the sky. And this represents the connection, the believed connection to ancestors. Like I said before, at 175,000 years ago, we have what could be, in a sense, a possible chapel or sacred space, these mystery cave rings created by the Neanderthals in France. And Neanderthal mouse steering technology, I think, connects to possibly animism/totemism. This new stone tool culture or industry, with its flint lithic tools associated primarily with the earliest modern humans as well, can be seen in North Africa, West Asia, as well as in Europe, certainly by 160 up to 40,000 years ago. The earliest stone tools of this kind were found in southwest France, and the tools, in a sense, were associated with Neanderthal, tool-making skills. Examples of these tools have been found in Europe and in Africa, and certainly at near the end of the existence of Neanderthals, they developed even more sophisticated tools and shaft points with handles, which to me is another thing that connects it from going from, in a sense, animism into totemism. Neanderthal, like I said, in Corsica, we have the earliest undisputed evidence for intentional burial at 130,000 years ago. Neanderthals buried their dead at sites such as this, and there was, in a sense, at this site in Corsica, 876 single Neanderthal fossil remains. The bones belong to several different individuals of different sexes, anywhere from ages of 2 up into ages of 40. More than 1,000 pieces of various stone tools and weapons are also found from this era, all witnessing to, in a sense, a material culture of these proto-humans. So northern Israel, by about 120,000 years ago, in a cave burial of containing a female, the material remains of this cave also are connected to the Neanderthal stone tool culture, and small flint tools such as thin flakes are predominant here, mainly produced, in a sense, by a very careful trimming of the flint core before you reach the desired shape to be, in a sense, struck off. Tools typical of this culture are elongated points, flakes of various shapes and used as scrapers. So like I said before, did Neanderthals teach us primal religion, or at least the concept of burial and maybe even thoughts of an afterlife? Well, in the cave in Mount Carmel in Israel, occupied intermittently during the lower and middle Paleolithic from about 500,000 to about 40,000 years ago, there are stone tool technologies from the Neanderthals evident there that involve Neanderthals, but then also very similar early modern humans that entered the area as well. And so these two, in a sense, us and the Neanderthals, are occupying the same region at the same time. In addition, that Neanderthals and early modern humans populations seem to use the same cave and possibly share and change the occurrences together over a period of time, expressing, in a sense, a resemblance also in burials, not just stone tool technologies. And I think it is likely that Neanderthals could have thus transmitted primal religion that they probably got from previous homos that related to them, and thus an evolution from this, in a sense, proto-animism to the animism that was more common after 100,000 years ago, and we still see in all religions today. So animism for humans, yay, we finally show up. Yeah. So animism is approximately a 100,000-year-old belief system. Certainly is connected to a spirit-filled life and or afterlife. And so animism to me is a more holistic and sort of a feminine nature, a way of seeing things. And I often see it kind of like as what we think of as people that are hippies. It is nature-based and has tricksters and malevolent spirits, and also protective and helpful spirits. There are spirits and supernatural beings, both animal and human, as well as non-human supernatural things or beings, but in general attributed in a sense to a sort of a somewhat personal ancestor, grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, such type of spirits, and not what we would think of gods today. And in animism, you can also even have a belief that rocks, in a sense, could have spirits. So certainly in a cave in Israel, we see modern human remains that are dated about 100,000 years ago to about 80,000 years ago. This site, there are hearths, stone tools that match the Neanderthals, and various, in a sense, items that seem to have cultural significance to these, as well as evidence of burials. It includes such things as 27 anatomically modern humans, with some arcane features, in a sense, certainly dating to about 92,000 years ago, where they were directly associated with the Neanderthal-type stone tool assemblages, and appeared also to have been purposely buried. So early animism in Africa, 100,000 years ago to 74,000 years ago in Border Cave in South Africa. And at this time, it was, in a sense, a savanna woodland. Vegetation, in a sense, would imply about 100,000 years ago. And it probably this type of a climate and would have aided in the diversity of the people and ideas. Around 74,000 years ago, there's a burial of a 4 to 6 month old child found in a pit with a personal adornment, a conch shell. And it seems that in this area there was a cultural innovation like grass bedding, dated between 70,000 and 30,000 years ago. Some of the oldest beds are made, in a sense, also with ostrich shells. And Border Cave, there are some that date to 42,000 years ago. Symbolic meaning seems to be at least 100,000 years old. And I think it connects to this emergence of animism. And so we have different engraved pieces of red ochre in things like Bablos Cave in South Africa in the Middle Stone Age layers. And it seems that since there was research done on these pieces, that they actually quantify into separate groupings, and they show an evolution of ideas as they evolved. 77,000 years ago in Bablos Cave, South Africa, are 49 intentionally perforated shell beads found in clusters of from 2 to 17 with similar wear patterns, suggesting they were strung together, and some beads holding ochre inside them, red ochre. Moreover, similar shell beads have also been found in caves in North Africa and the Middle East, dating from 100,000 to 70,000 years ago. 75,600 years ago, in France, there's found a Neanderthal stone tool that looks like a human face, and a hole was made and a bone was shoved in between the hole to make it look like eyes, it appears. And so it's understanding that the symbolic representation or expression it certainly is not limited to what we think of as modern humans. And was it just us? The origins of the modern mind 75,000 years ago? It doesn't look so. Thus, we need to rethink our ideas about the evolving mind of Neanderthals, such as seen in their skulls. The fact that they're elongated back like a football and actually are a little bit larger brain cases than modern humans, who have more of a baseball-shaped head. Modern human infants, though, also have somewhat of elongated skulls. But by the time they reach adulthood, their heads have rounded into in a sense, basketball-like shape. Analyzing Neanderthal DNA in Europeans identifies 2 Neanderthal gene variants linked to head shape, also the influence of brain organization. In evolution, acting on the brain might have reshaped the skull of modern humans. So there's art or some sort of a crystal stone tools that were unused made by Neanderthals. 75,000 years ago, they could be evidence of sacred stones. And just think, a clear, stone to them would have been like magic, I would think, because every other stone is absolutely not clear. And these are not good to use as stone tools, and there certainly was better stones with which to make stone tools for actual function. We can assume that these were never used as stone tools, and thus not tools, but rather something else, like I believe sacred stones or some sort of ritual items. These rock crystals are surprisingly not good as tools, as flint or other similar stone materials would be that were available, which seems to suggest that they were created for a possible sacred or ritual use or purpose, other than simply a utilitarian or practical function. Thus, this seemingly shows that it wasn't a scarcity or a lack of quality raw materials, but this behavior was done for some other, more intentional reason. And these were made by Neanderthals. So there's a understanding that at one point, certainly before 100,000, there probably was at least 3 human groups in Africa: North Africa, East Africa, and South Africa. But our origins actually are limited to modern humans today to, in a sense, a single origin model, where all humans today, in a sense, originate from the data from localized South African origins. Our origins originate from South Africa, not the first ancestors ever, as that would in a sense be North Africa around 300,000 years ago, or to East Africa, which was around 200,000 years ago, but rather our last main common ancestors dating about under 100,000 years ago. And this is why, in a sense, all populations that are modern today take this, in a sense, animism from Africa, because we all, in a sense, were limited to one point and one set of ideas. Not because religion is inherent, in a sense, or some sort of a universal thing, as much as that we were all, in a sense, connected to the people that had these ideas and shared them with everyone that was around, and this just has spread and spread and spread. So this is, in a sense, this most recent area where everyone went down, probably because of climate change. Climate change is a large factor of why religions, in a sense, develop, why they move, and why they change. And from this origins, we leave somewhere in around 75,000 years ago. 75 to 70,000 years ago in Rhino Cave is a stone snake in South Africa. Seems to be the first evidence of human worship. Evidence in Rhino Cave in Botswana produces results that seem to be a very special set of behavior patterns, which in a sense fits mainly only a ritualized behavior. There was colorful, non-local stone tools that were carefully and often elaborately made just to be offered to the stone snake by being burnt and smashed under it and then being abandoned. "74,000 years ago in Border Cape, South Africa, like I said before, is the 4 to 6 month-year-old child burial found in a pit with a personal adornment of a shell. Other shells also were found in that area. 73,000 years ago is an example of meaning consisting of a few red line patterns from a red ochre crayon type of use found in Babalos Cave in South Africa. But this fragment found is only a small part of a possibly larger symbolic design drawing. So that on this little piece of cobble, researchers believe that its cross-hatchings were originally part of a larger design and are perplexed to see what it might represent. Well, I think it represents this new emerging set of belief and cultural understandings. So there's evidence of in Desovian cave of an artifact that is a bracelet of some kind, and this artifact is anywhere from 40,000 to 70,000 years ago. It is broken into pieces, but it's highly polished bracelet made of dark green stone. It is believed to have been made by the Denisovans or Desovians, and was found at the same layer as their remains. This seemingly Desovian bracelet had a drill hole which likely was used for tying something, which seems to show it is more than just art, also showing that it is, in a sense, possibly a hypothetical form of totemism ritualistically used possibly in ceremonies. And it is believed that it probably was affixed to a female. And so the bracelet was thought to have been possibly part of with an important female or possibly a child, and only used in special occasions. And it is likely it was not used as everyday jewelry piece, as it's too fragile. And I believe this is a beautiful bracelet is fragile and would have been worn basically, at exceptional, moments or events. And thus, to me, it most likely was used in a religious type of a ceremony or ritual behavior. Neanderthals, did they also help inspire totemism? Because it does seem that Neanderthal art dating to about 65,000 years ago in Spain seems to have ritualistic more than just artistic representations. This Neanderthal ritual or religious practice of art at about 64,000 years ago seems to be expressed in paintings in caves in Spain. Certainly, they are 20,000 years before what we believe modern humans even arrived in Europe. This means that in this Ice Age cave art made by them, including pictures of animals, dots, geometric signs, that may have been made by Neanderthals and indicate that they might have had some sort of a similar ritualistic sense about the use of this type of art. And this thinking in more of a symbolic way. That we like to think is more limited to modern humans type of conceptions. And there's things such as handprint outlines that are also found in Spain and that have been dated to 66,000 years ago, which means it definitely must have been Neanderthals that made them. 65,000 years ago in Kenya, there's a site that holds a mix of technologies dated to as much as 67,000 years ago or after. However, it is in a sense no radical break of behavior, as it's simply an extenuation of the existing behaviors of the time. And certainly after about 60,000 years ago, there is noticeable increase in populations and this behavior. Between 48 and 25,000 years ago, there is carved bone, carved tusks, and decorated bone tubes and small bone points. There's a modification of ochre that also are found and seem to indicate behavioral complexity and new emerging symbolisms. 60,000 years ago, there's fragments of engraved ostrich shells in South Africa. Now, it's important that these shells probably, now they're found in fragments, but they probably originally were the exact entire shell that was hollowed out and used probably to contain or hold water, almost like we think of a thermos. This would allow movement of people and then also the storage of water. And this is important because these seem to have ornamentation or engraving designs that could be the earliest evidence of this symbolist expression for a particular family group, a expressed clan, or maybe just a personal expression. This is my water, this is the clan's water, this is my family's water. But certainly this is getting us closer to one step closer to written language, and certainly the expression and social bonding. Progressed religion. About 50,000 years ago marks a transition from the earlier prehistory, where evidence of burial and grave goods becomes more. The appearance of more anthropomorphic type of images, both in cave walls, in caves itself, like a pseudo-womb paintings, as well as humans seem to begin to believe in more supernatural beings. This likewise is a time where humans evolved the traits associated with more human behavior as well. Much of the evidence comes, in a sense, from sites in Africa. Modern human behavior includes the abilities of modern language, abstract thought, and symbolism, as well as religion. Like most behaviors that are found in societies throughout the world, religion in some form must have been, in a sense, present in these ancestral human populations. Therefore, they distributed from Africa. And about 50,000 years ago also, Neanderthal cave bear hunting seems to also involve what could be a form of symbolism or worship. It seems that Neanderthals' bite marks spotted on cave bear bones. Furthermore, hunting remains belonging to a total of 50 cave bears in regional caves linked between 50,000 and 43,000 years ago. It seems that bands of Neanderthals would regularly ambush bears, male and female adults, as well as cubs, and then there's also evidence of fetuses. And this possibly happened as they awoke from their annual hibernations. And they were targeted for, assumingly, their pelts, their meats, and even their living quarters. Among the fossil remains, there are also penis bones. Yes, I did not know bears had penis bones. And they show that Neanderthals hunted them, seemingly killing the hardest to kill. So why? Why go after the adult male bears? Cave bears may have spent more time in caves also than the current brown bears today, who use the caves mainly only for hibernation. So Decennivan totemism 50,000 years ago, there's in a sense what seems to be a male Tihara made of mammoth ivory that hints, in a sense, to the depth of not only their technology, but their expression, likely for family, clan, tribe. And to me, this connects to likely early totemist behaviors. 50,000 years ago, there seems to be a mortuary crypt made by Neanderthals, possibly again Neanderthal totemism, for it involved things like leopard or panther paws and the burial of the dead. And it's seen in a female Neanderthal skeleton and associated also with a Neanderthal child skull. The Neanderthal ritual or religious practice about 50,000 years ago seen in mortuary crypt, which to me is a form of Neanderthal totemism, such as that in southeastern Spain, which involves a female covered with rocks, interned, and also with cut off panther paws, suggesting that much like hunters who ceremoniously cut off paws, keeping them as totemistic trophies. So totemism, approximately a 50,000-year-old belief system. Totemism to me is less holistic than its animistic forebear and somewhat more masculine-centered than animism as well. It is likely highly supportive taboos and clan structures, things that separate and must be separated and stay with, or sacred and profane, off limits or allowed, clean or unclean. In a sense, a whole system running people's lives, like religion tries to do even to this day. Things in nature, thus under totemism, are to be controlled or feared. Things in nature have danger or can be evil. But it can also be used for good and can be helpful for protection. There are spirits that are, in a sense, similar to that already expressed in animism, and shared space in a sense of like things like a metaphoric clan ancestors or group ancestors. There also seems to be things like supernatural beings, both animal and human alike, just like animism. But whereas animals, in a sense, are likely more calmer and more helpful and than things that you see later in totemism that it seemed to be a little bit more referencing of aggression. So totemism is a belief system in which humans have a kinship or a, in a sense, mystical relationship with a spirit being, such as an animal or plant. The entity or totem is thought to interact with or give kinship group to an individual, to a group or individual, and serve in a sense as an emblem or a symbol for them. The term totemism has been used to characterize a cluster of traits that are found in religion and social organization of many peoples. Totemism is manifested in various forms and types depending on different contexts. It is often among peoples or populations whose traditional economies are more hunter-gatherers, mixed than farming and hunting-gathering. So there's Paleolithic jewelry made out of ostrich shells between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago. 22 artifacts, artifact layers dating back as much as 125 to 180,000 years ago have also been found connected to Neanderthals. Besides tools found, the decorated objects in bone, mammoth tucks, animal teeth, ostrich shell, drilled and polished, at least 40,000 years old to 50,000 years old. The world ancestry for Denisovans shows that there is a large geographical dispersal of the genes. Gene flow from Denisovans or other archaean populations seem to be directly found in modern day humans. Modern humans inbred with Decentivans at least twice, and our genomes seem to express two different groups or two different clans. In a sense, one of the mainly in Oceania and the other in East Asia, in a sense, seem to be uniquely different, indicating that there were two separate episodes of Desovian admixture. In fact, East Asian DNA is a set of Desovian ancestry not found in South Asians or Papua New Guinea. Moreover, it is determined that the Decennivam genome is more closely related to modern East Asian populations than to modern Papua New Guineas. Although DNA from Papua New Guinea up against the Desovian genome is similar enough to declare a match, some of the DNA sequences of East Asians, notably Han Chinese and some Japanese, are much closer matched with the Decentivans. The assumption is that admixing with Decentivans occurred fairly quickly after humans moved out of Africa, possibly around 50,000 years ago. But we don't know where or in what terms. DNA from Decentivans at the Siberian cave dwellers is found in a sense, Aboriginal descendants and the first settlers on the continent. And separate studies suggest that the ability of Tibetans to withstand effects of low oxygen environments is directly linked to a gene that is absent in Neanderthals but is present in the Decentivans. Where the inbreeding event between Decentivans and early modern humans actually took place is currently unknown. There is also evidence of fossil teeth that modern humans were in South China by at least 80,000 years ago, and in other areas at 65,000 years ago. So populations connected to those could be much more like the Decentivans than the first colonizers that found their way to Australia. Neanderthal totemism, or pre-agrarian totemism, is between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago. The so-called transitional industries are a key to understanding the replacement of Neanderthals by modern humans in Western Eurasia at the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic between 50 to 40,000 years ago. While in Europe, the older Neanderthal stone tool styles clearly attributed to Neanderthals, and then the later assemblages can be, in a sense, addressed to modern humans. The nature of the markers and the transition can be somewhat disputed. Around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, there seems to be emergence of norm violations relating to what I think is totemistic cultural influenced behavior. The research suggests that this connects to moral disgust. The early moralistic totemism, or taboo set of beliefs, which to me relates to in a sense, a genetic, or seen in the genetic evidence of possible moral disgust, with genetics showing that after 40,000 years ago, there is an extreme lowering of incest behaviors. It coincides with this emergence of more complex things like cave art and figurines, personal adornments that become more widespread, between also about 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. All of this and more seems to offer compelling evidence for my thoughts that totemism's emergence is somewhere around 50,000 years ago. The dispersal of humans from Africa into other areas was not a one-time event, not a one type of DNA event. It was multiple events and multiple migrations. Agrarian culture, some people term this as Cro-Magnon. I do not, because I like the actual culture. And it's between 47,000 to 41,000 years ago, and it covers a lot of Europe. So the migration route to the Americas was probably from Siberia over the land bridge. And this also connects to some of the first areas in Siberia where we see modern humans. Agrarian culture in Europe about 46,000 to 35,000 years ago. Totemism does seem to be expressed in Europe as early as at least 50,000 years ago, and is majorly championed, it seems, in the agrarian culture. And I think this was probably a diffusion between the Neanderthals and humans that were already pre-existing in Europe. Modern humans' expansions into this area is one of the earliest things of human, in a sense, remains have been found at 45,000 years ago in western Siberia. And then in Russia, by 39 to 36,000 years ago. Italy by 41 to 39,000 years ago. Romania by 37 to 42,000 years ago. The skull of Neanderthals seem to have a few that have been modified. This is evidence for the possible skull modification, which could be connected to a ritualistic type of behavior that we certainly see in other populations, even in the Americas, where head binding. This is not, in a sense, from modern humans, but relates rather to our ancestor, or partial ancestor, the Neanderthals. And while they're not a full ancestor, the Neanderthals, still many modern humans do carry Neanderthal genes, and a contribution was made by Neanderthals to our genomes, even if it was just modest. Yet, it may have been proved vitally important for many modern humans, as well as it could have carried a few issues for us as well. And these cranial modifications were found in at least 2 burials, Sindar 1 and Sindar 5 from Iraq. So, mammoth bone dwellings range from around 44,000 to 14,000 years ago, likely first started by Neanderthals, and seem to have expressions of a kind of a cultist culture associated with them. Maybe as to me some form of totemism, a social, religious, symbolic meanings. These ritual structures seem to have begun with Neanderthals and then continued with modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Gravettian and the Epigravettian cultures that preceded them, and seem to be somewhat similar in the area that the first ones were built by the Neanderthals. And interesting enough, too, is the 44,000-year-old Neanderthal bone structure near Moldova was constructed of 116 large, deliberately selected mammoth bones, including skulls, jaws, tusks, legs. Inside there was at least 25 fire pits. And from the artifacts found, Neanderthals made many decorative carvings in addition to the symbolic adding of ochre pigments to bones. The painting in red on the front mammoth skull represents possible flames or sparks of fire. And the bones were buried in fire pits. So it could be also a further evidence of ritualistic representation connection, which I think it is. It could be a prehistoric, also kind of a drum, consisting of a mammoth skull, which may, in a sense, relate to changing forms of totemism to the newer form that becomes shamanism. And in a sense, it was set at an entrance, so it was seen as you walked in. At the top of the skull bears, in a sense, impressions that seems to have been beaten by drumsticks. The animal long bones that were found to bear corresponding damage on their ends. It is possible that the building may have served as some sort of ritual or communal function as well. And the mammoth bones being beaten rhythmically throughout, in a sense, time seems a normal thing for religion. 43,500 years ago, there's rock art, which possibly is either made by Neanderthals or modern humans, depicting what seems to be sea lions, as well as may hold symbolic meaning, such as how they seemingly can live, in a sense, under the water, and then above it as well. Charcoal remains found besides the 6 paintings in Spain date to around 43,500 to 42,300 years ago. And there's a 43,000-year-old pendant found in Russia, with numerous other pendants recovered, and but at least the one above is dated at 43,000, made from a fossil of a squid. The artifacts include groups of more than 40 pendants made from fox canine teeth. In addition, there are pendants made from stone fossils as well, along with shell beads in the lower layers. And 17 pendants are found to be the earliest good evidence for personal adornment anywhere in Eastern Europe. There's an ornament found in a Turkish cave that is 41,000 to 43,000 years ago. Ornaments, I should say, are abundant in initial other layers, and the point is they're present because of a purpose. And I think that the purpose of using, in a sense, these notch raptor bones or talons probably relates to sky burial beliefs. The belief that these birds feast on bodies and then take them, in a sense, up into the sky to live with the ancestors, I would assume. Agurian cave art dating from about 43,000 to 35,000 years ago seems to have totemistic representations. To me, the art represents, in a sense, a dichotomy of both gender, fertility cults, and cultural persuasion as hunting and gathering societies. I theorize that in societies, totemistic cultural behavior can be divided into hunting cult and gathering cults at this time, which expressed, in a sense, a domestic cult or a feminine gathering cult, and its partner of a warrior type or a hunting masculine cult. There are dots that are found possibly to be on walls to be, in a sense, totemistic star representation of ancestors or animal spirits. In a cave dating to at least 40,800 in Spain seems to be a representation of this. I think that an adding of dots could represent, in a sense, the start of things like the sun in the day and the stars and the moon at night, or other celestial bodies, which relates, I think, to ancestors or animal spirits. And certainly this is seen as, after 12,000 years ago, is probably adding deities as well. There's cave art about 30,000 years ago in Indonesia, paintings with thousands of drawings in stencil limestone caves, tucked in remote mountains, far eastern edge. I think this also connects to this new totemism. Around 40,000 to 35,000 years ago, there's remains of personal adornments, awls, pierced animal teeth, and ivory pendants that have been made from Neanderthal. Certainly, to me, totemistic cultural layers. Totemism in Indonesia certainly starts by about 40,000 to 22,000 years ago. And there certainly is cave paintings that of hands that are about 39,900, and rock art of a female pig that is about 35,400 years old. And to me, this could be referencing a type of female clan or gathering cult, as well as tusks and teeth used at 30,000 to 22,000 years ago, and from a bear in the area from about 26,000 to 22,000 years, probably represents the male or hunting cult, which together form the larger hunter-gatherer totemistic cult religion. Artifacts of importance including also red ochre pieces or ochre-stained tools, bone tubes that may have been used as blowpipes, used to create the hand stencils, or the motifs of portable art objects as well. So to me also to understand is that the idea of a male god is ridiculous. The oldest anthropomorphic, in a sense, clearly genderfied anthropomorphic figure is female. And that's from 500 to 233,000 years ago in Israel, and then 40,000 to 35,000 years ago in Germany is, I think, the first totem, and it's a little necklace of a female. And then, to me, you also see in shamanism at 31,000 to 20,000 years ago that there is representation of females and as part of the religion, and certainly the oldest representation of a face associated with a person is of a older female. So stars, ancestors, animal spirits, and then deities. Certainly by around 6,000 years ago, there's a connection to this older shamanistic belief that probably goes back to about 30,000 years ago, although I believe that this idea goes at least back to 40,000 years ago with totemism. And 38,000 years ago, there's engravings that look like pointillism or dots. And I think this is just an expression of the stars and solar bodies or whatever, and art used as a totemistic expression. And there's cave art that also matches this, and portable art that shows this behavior. Then there's also an artifact that's probably relating to the agrarian totemism, and similar to other type of cultural items. There's like the lion man in Germany, but the lion man to me is not a man. It would be a lion figure. And this one here is important because one side of this ivory plaque or statuette, which is from 32,500 to 38,000 years ago. There are 86 notches on the other side of the tablet, which is thought to have two types of special meanings. And one is that it's believed that it equals the average number of days for pregnancy, and the other is how many days that one of Orion's two prominent stars is visible. To ancient man, or humans, they might have linked, in a sense, human fertility with spirits and stars in the sky. Totemistic hunting cults. Around 37,500 to 32,500-year-old bison skulls are found, possibly symbolic or ritualized items, and certainly a major animal for them, are shown to, in a sense, in the ornamentation or orientation of certain caves, for example. A trophy head belongs to a male individual, and mainly depictions of bison in the Paleolithic art back this up. Totemistic cave art in France. This 37,000 to 33,500-year-old cave art from the Agrarian period. It seems like it could lead to the later organization of goddess, earth below, and bull, the sky above, cults that are certainly found by 12,000 years ago. At the emergence of the agricultural revolution is where we see goddesses and bull cults, primarily in this early paganism. Certainly by this paganism is expressed by 10,000 to 8,000 years ago, when you see sitting goddesses and the association also of big cats, seemingly originating in this early totemistic type art. 35,000 to 30,000 years ago, in Spain, there's a person buried wearing a burial cap of knitted, in a sense, shells, and bordered by deer teeth. Red ochre stains the whole face, and a bone awl also found along its side, showing this sort of a ritualistic type of burial. So 34,000 years ago is the oldest lunar calendars, and they speak of this emerging human awareness with the stars or heavens above. And to me, I think it connects to ancestors, as well as could reference this emergence of what later is fertility cults, which date back, it seems, to this agrarian period in Europe, at least by about 47,000 to 26,000 years ago. This early culture produced some of the earliest known cave art, pendants, bracelets, beads, and figurines. These totemistic, in a sense, astronomers made records of lunar cycles and set marks into animal bones, occasionally also on cave walls. Some of the oldest lunar calendars and the earliest constellations identified are in cave art found in France and Germany, that seem to express this understanding of both mathematical sets that relates to the actual moon cycles, ecliptics, solstice, and seasonal changes on the earth. These belief systems seem to be present in art and start back in totemism, which begins, as I said, I believe, about 50,000 years ago in Europe, and then is transferred as well as adapted by shamanists, starting about 30,000 years ago, and then paganists starting about 12,000 years ago and beyond. Artifacts such as these express advanced seeming knowledge of the sun, moon, possibly asteroids, and various other solar planets or events, the interesting cosmic events that we see in the sky. Ancient bone fragments discovered in French caves from various Paleolithic sites consist of objects engraved or printed with a series of dots or lines as possibly accurate lunar observations. Early shamanism probably starts about 30,000 to 34,000 years ago in Russia or Siberia. Seemingly, we see graves with enormous amounts of beads in the grave buried. And then there's a dancing figurine, and it's about 32,000 years ago. And it's about 3 inches high, and it's carved with one hand held high. And I think this connects to the shamanistic burial, probably of dance, as well as the animistic pre-existing spirit-filled life or afterlife, attached to such things that are given as or used as objects or totems. And to me, they're used probably by persons in special rituals connected to spirit-filled life or afterlife beliefs. Early shamanism, about 31,000 to 20,000 years ago. In the Czech Republic, we see burial of shaman as a female. Then also, about 30,000 years ago, there's figure stones in France, which seemingly address or depict carnivores, mainly with a large focus on bears, and it could be expressing a possible bear cult. And this dating about 30,000 years old or older, and these artifacts range, in a sense, in their development. So shamanism is approximately 30,000-year-old belief system to me. So let me recap. Pre-Animism is about 300,000 years ago. Animism about 100,000 years ago. Totemism about 50,000 years ago. Shamanism is about 30,000 years ago. Paganism to me is about 12,000 years ago. And progressed organized religion is about 5,000 years ago. I am against all religions. And there are 3 harmful things common in all religions to me: pseudoscience, pseudo-history, and pseudo-morality. What makes some believe truth is actually true. To me, truth in general is a value judgment we place on what we think or believe is evidence or reason. Therefore, the rational imperative is upon us to be intellectually honest thinkers, to demonstrate what the proposed evidence or reason assumption actually is, with a high standard, with as much valid and reliable reason and evidence as possible, from a credible source as possible, which then makes some believed truth actually worthy to be seen as epistemologically true, thus a justified true belief. Do you have such justification for your beliefs? Simply by claiming to know something by faith is to act in the way that is mirroring a dishonest thinker. As intellectually honest thinkers don't claim knowledge without justification. And faith is not a justification. It is simply your expressed psychological feelings. My goal against religion is to fully stop forced indoctrination of children, as well as to help debunk the belief in religions and all their magical claims. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed.